The seamstress measured Catherine Locksley for mourning before anyone placed the wedding veil upon her head. Black crepe lay across the vestry table beside ivory silk, and the contrast was so stark that even the maid holding the pins refused to look directly at it. Outside the closed door, the chapel bells waited for the Duke of St. Aldwyn. Inside, Catherine stood on a small fitting platform, while a tape passed around her shoulders as though the dimensions of her death required accuracy. "The sleeves should be narrow," her aunt said from the hearth. "She won't need them for long." Catherine lifted her chin. November rain tapped the high windows, and the scent of beeswax, wet wool and lilies made the room feel already prepared for a funeral. "You may stop," she told the seamstress. The woman's fingers froze. Catherine's aunt gave an impatient sigh. "Don't be difficult today. The arrangements are practical. So is a coffin. I don't intend to be measured for one before breakfast." Her uncle turned from the solicitor's desk. "You're marrying a duke because practical arrangements are all that remain to you." He spoke quietly, as though cruelty became kindness when delivered without heat. "House of Mereworth requires the scandal ended. Our creditors require reassurance. You require protection for the time you have left." "And afterward?" Catherine asked. "Afterward, everyone will be free of inconvenience." No one answered. The silence did. Dr. Tobias Rook entered carrying a walnut medical case polished to the color of old blood. He was a narrow man with silver at his temples, and the assured expression of someone whose conclusions were rarely questioned by people beneath him. Lady Arabella Gresham followed in dove-grey silk, one hand resting upon the case as if she had carried it through the corridor. She was not family, not nurse, and not yet mistress of any Mereworth household, yet she moved among them with the serene authority of a woman already certain where every person would stand once Catherine was gone. "You should sit," Rook said. "I'm standing well enough. Feeling strong for a few minutes doesn't alter the course of pulmonary fever." He placed 2 fingers at her wrist. Catherine disliked the way everyone watched his face instead of hers. He counted briefly, released her, and opened the case. Inside lay 6 cream cards stitched at one corner with crimson thread. Each bore a different date and a neat sequence of observations about fever, weakness, confusion, and blood. Rook added another line to the newest card. Catherine leaned slightly closer. The ink shone black beneath the grey light. So did the ink on the card, supposedly written 3 months earlier. The same faint, sharp smell rose from both. "May I see them?" she asked. Rook closed the cover with one hand. "Medical notes aren't suitable reading for a patient in your condition." "My condition appears to be suitable reading for everyone else." Arabella's smile carried gentle sorrow. "Catherine, no one is trying to distress you. That sentence usually arrives after the distress." The chapel door opened before Arabella could reply. Frederick Mereworth, Duke of St. Aldwyn, entered without announcement. He was tall, dark-haired, and controlled in the manner of a man who had spent years making stillness resemble certainty. Rain marked the shoulders of his black coat. His gaze moved first to Catherine, then to the mourning crepe spread beside her veil. Something in his face hardened. "Remove that." The seamstress looked toward Catherine's aunt. Frederick did not raise his voice. "Now." Black cloth disappeared into a basket. Catherine stepped down from the fitting platform. The Duke had protected her from one humiliation, but the room still belonged to his purpose. The failed Locksley investment had touched Mereworth funds and left both houses under gossip. Marriage would place the scandal beneath his title. Catherine's expected death would end it cleanly. Frederick approached the solicitor's desk, where a standard marriage settlement waited beneath blue ribbon. "The amended copy?" he asked. The solicitor hesitated. "There has been no amendment, Your Grace." Catherine crossed the room before her uncle could stop her. "There will be." Her aunt's face tightened. "This is not the time. It's the only time I have." Catherine opened the document. She had read enough contracts during her father's final illness to recognize the shape of surrender. The settlement granted her an allowance and use of Merricliff House in Cornwall. But upon her death, the property rights passed through trustees, with a discretionary benefit reserved for her Locksley relations. This clause must change. Her uncle took one step forward. "You don't understand the instrument. I understand that my family expects to profit from a house I have not yet seen." She looked at the solicitor. "Merricliff is to remain under my separate use during the marriage. My relatives are to receive no benefit from it upon my death. Any lease or transfer must require my signature while I am capable of writing it." The solicitor glanced toward Frederick. "The first two conditions may be incorporated before the ceremony. The final wording would require trustee consent for any transfer. But Her Grace's approval can be made necessary under the settlement." "She is not Her Grace yet," Catherine's aunt said. Frederick's attention remained on Catherine. "How did you find the clause?" "I read it. No one else objected. No one else was being priced by the page." For the first time, something almost human moved behind his restraint. Not warmth, recognition. "Make the amendment," he told the solicitor. Catherine's uncle lost his composure. "Your Grace, the Locksleys accepted this arrangement in good faith. You accepted the prospect of inheriting from a dying woman." Frederick's voice stayed low. "Do not confuse that with faith." The solicitor began writing. Catherine watched each word appear. Her pulse beat too quickly, and a pressure tightened beneath her ribs. But she would not sit while other people arranged the legal shape of her absence. Arabella came near enough for the scent of violets to reach her. "You are creating difficulty where none is needed." Catherine did not look away from the pen. "Difficulty for whom?" "For Frederick. He is offering you protection. Protection that becomes someone else's property when I stop breathing is only orderly disposal." Arabella's gaze cooled. "You speak as though recovery remains possible. Does that offend you?" "It concerns me." Dr. Rook reopened his case. "Agitation will worsen the fever." Catherine looked again at the crimson thread cards. One dated August had a tiny blot beneath the final line. The newest card bore a blot in the same place, as though the writer's hand had paused twice in one sitting. She reached for the older card. Rook drew the case back. "Enough." Frederick saw the movement. What did she notice? Nothing of medical importance. "Then show her." Rook's expression tightened by a degree. A physician must be allowed discretion, and a bride should be allowed to read the evidence predicting her death, Catherine said. The bells began outside, one measured note after another. The solicitor sanded the amendment and turned the document toward her. Catherine signed first. Her hand remained steady. Frederick signed beneath her name. Her uncle refused to witness until Frederick looked at him. Then he did so without another word. A maid lifted the ivory veil. Catherine allowed it to settle over her hair. But before she turned toward the chapel, she looked at Frederick through the fine netting. "You have given me a house and denied my family the right to inherit it." "Yes." "You removed the mourning cloth." "Yes." "You ask the physician one question." His face grew more guarded. "What more do you require?" Catherine glanced at the walnut case in Rook's hands, at Arabella standing beside it, and at the relatives already calculating what dignity might cost them. Only an honest answer. The bells continued, calling them toward vows built upon a death everyone except Catherine had accepted. "When you leave me at Merricliff," she asked, "will you stay long enough to see whether your wife actually dies?" Frederick did not answer before the chapel doors opened. The organ began, low and solemn, and every face turned toward Catherine as though the ceremony had already become a form of waiting. She entered on her uncle's arm because custom required it. His hand at her elbow felt less like support than custody. The private chapel was narrow, panelled in dark oak, and lit by winter candles that trembled whenever the outer doors shifted in the wind. Frederick stood before the altar in black formal dress, his expression controlled once more. Arabella occupied the front pew beside Dr. Rook, close enough to observe every change in Catherine's face. Catherine fixed her gaze on the Duke instead. He had removed the mourning cloth. He had amended the settlement. Neither act answered her question. The clergyman began. Catherine heard her own name spoken beside Frederick's title and felt the distance between them become legal. When he repeated the vows, his voice did not falter. When her turn came, her breath caught once beneath the tight line of her stays, but she continued, "I will." The ring was old gold, plain except for the worn Mereworth crest on the inner band. Frederick slid it onto her finger carefully, as though even contact required restraint. "Till death do us part," the clergyman said. Catherine looked at the ring. Everyone else in the chapel seemed to hear a vow. She heard a date no one had written yet. After the register was signed, Frederick offered his arm. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly. "I walked here." "That wasn't my question." "Then ask whether I choose to." A flicker of impatience crossed his face, followed by something more controlled. "Do you?" "Yes." She placed her hand on his sleeve. The gesture satisfied the chapel. It did not create intimacy. At the wedding breakfast, 12 guests sat beneath silver sconces in the adjoining dining room. There were no flowers beyond white lilies, no music, and no laughter that survived more than a few seconds. Catherine had been seated at Frederick's right, but Arabella occupied the place beyond him, close enough to speak without raising her voice. Dr. Rook sat opposite Catherine with the walnut case beneath his chair. The first course had barely been served when Catherine's aunt began explaining that Merricliff's sea air might soothe the lungs. "The house is isolated," she said. "That will spare Catherine unnecessary company." "Company is only unnecessary when it is unwanted," Catherine replied. Her aunt gave a brittle smile. "You have always exhausted yourself by resisting what is good for you." Frederick turned slightly toward Catherine. "What would you prefer?" The question surprised the table, to be asked before decisions are announced as kindness. "Then I am asking." Catherine looked at him. "I would prefer sunlight, open windows when weather allows, and no one recording how many steps I take between rooms." Rook set down his spoon. "That would be medically unwise." "You have not seen Merricliff," Catherine said, "nor have you seen me in 8 days without first reading your own notes." Arabella intervened with practiced softness. "Catherine, Doctor, Rook has cared for you through the worst of the fever. He has observed me through other people." Rook's expression cooled. A physician must rely upon attendance when a patient is too weak or agitated for direct examination. "I was strong enough to read a settlement this morning." Brief clarity doesn't erase prolonged decline. Frederick looked toward the walnut case. Your summary states that recovery is unlikely, extremely unlikely. And the individual records? Rook reached down, opened the case, and removed a folded sheet, condensed here for convenience. Frederick read the first page. Catherine watched his eyes move across the words that predicted her failing pulse, repeated fever, weakness, and confusion. He did not ask for the stitched cards beneath it. "You are reading the conclusion," she said. "It contains the relevant facts." "Relevant to whom?" Ruka replied before Frederick could. "To anyone responsible for your care." A maid entered carrying fresh linen. As she approached Catherine's chair, something slipped from the folded stack and landed near the edge of the carpet. It was a handkerchief, white lawn stained dark red through the center. The maid stopped so suddenly that one of the plates rattled behind her. Catherine's aunt gasped. Rook stood at once. "Do not move, Her Grace." Every person at the table looked at Catherine's mouth, then at the cloth. Catherine touched her lips. Her fingers came away clean. "That is not mine." "You may not remember coughing," Rook said. "I remember not doing it." He reached for the handkerchief, but Catherine bent first and caught the corner before he could take it. Pale blue embroidery marked one edge. The initials were small, elegant, and unmistakable. A.G. Catherine raised the cloth. "Lady Arabella." Arabella's color changed only slightly. "I may have left it in the dressing room." "With blood on it?" "I suffered a nosebleed yesterday, and your handkerchief found its way into linen carried beside my chair." Arabella looked toward the maid. She must have gathered it by mistake. The maid's face had gone white. "I'm sorry, my lady. I found it folded with Her Grace's things." "Where?" Catherine asked. "In the dressing room, Your Grace." Rook extended his hand. "Give it to me." "Why?" "Because this scene is distressing you. The cloth is distressing because it is being called proof." Frederick rose. Conversation stopped. He took the handkerchief from Catherine, not from Rook, and examined the embroidered initials. "This remains with me." Arabella's voice tightened. "Frederick, surely you don't think I placed it there?" "I think the object presented as evidence of my wife's hemorrhage bears your initials. That proves carelessness, not design. Then no one should object to preserving it." Rook's mouth flattened. "Your Grace, medical evidence should remain in medical hands." "This is a handkerchief," Frederick said, "not a diagnosis." Catherine felt a small, unwelcome relief. He had noticed, he had acted. Yet when he folded the cloth and placed it inside his coat, he did not challenge the prognosis itself. Arabella saw that too. A guest, near the lower end of the table, a cousin of Catherine's uncle, attempted to lighten the room with a nervous laugh. Whatever the truth of one cloth, the girl has secured the finest ending available to her. She will, at least, die a duchess. The words fell harder than any shout. Catherine's hand closed around the stem of her untouched glass. Frederick turned toward the man. "Leave." The guest stared. "Your Grace, I meant no offense. You described my wife's death as an advantage. Leave my house." The man looked toward Catherine's uncle for rescue and found none. His chair scraped backward. He bowed badly and departed beneath the gaze of the servants. Catherine waited until the door closed. "You punished him?" Frederick sat again. "He insulted you." "Yes." "Was I wrong?" "No," she looked at him steadily. "But removing a cruel man from the room does not make the room honest." His expression changed. "What honesty do you require now?" "That you admit you still believe Dr. Rook more than you believe me." Frederick glanced at the physician, then at the clean skin around Catherine's mouth. "I believe the handkerchief may not be yours." "That is not the same thing." "No. The answer was quiet and exact. It hurt because he did not pretend otherwise. The meal ended without another public exchange. In the withdrawing room, while servants prepared the carriage for Cornwall, Frederick approached Catherine beside the unlit fireplace. He held a small velvet case. Inside stood a silver hourglass no taller than her palm. Fine white sand filled the upper bulb. 3 minutes, he said. Rook recommends short intervals of exertion followed by rest. Catherine lifted it. The silver frame was beautifully made, with tiny wings engraved along the base. You have given me a device to measure how long I may stand, to prevent exhaustion, or to count what remains. His gaze held hers. That is not why I chose it. Why did you? He hesitated. Because it can be turned again. The answer reached her despite herself. It suggested continuance, even from a man who had not yet found the courage to believe in it. Catherine closed the velvet case. Through the doorway, she saw Arabella near the hall table. Dr. Rook handed her the walnut medical case while fastening his gloves. Their exchange was brief, familiar, and carried no surprise. Arabella accepted the case as though it belonged in her hands. Catherine looked back at Frederick. Will she travel with us? No. And Dr. Rook? He will send instructions. Instructions based on cards I am not permitted to read. Frederick's jaw tightened. At Merricliff, you will have privacy and every comfort. Comfort is not the same as truth. A footman announced that the carriage was ready. Frederick offered his arm. Catherine took it because she had chosen to leave, not because she had forgotten the unanswered question. As they crossed the hall, Arabella smiled and wished her strength. Catherine paused beside her. You should be more careful with your handkerchiefs. Arabella's eyes cooled. And you should be more careful with your imagination. Catherine looked at the walnut case under her arm. One of us is carrying too much of the other woman's illness. Then she walked on, with Frederick beside her and the silver hourglass held against her palm. Merricliff House appeared at dusk as a dark shape above the western cliffs. Its windows turned toward a restless grey sea. The carriage climbed the final mile through wind-bent grass and stone walls slick with rain. Catherine held the silver hourglass in both hands while the last pale grains fell. Frederick sat opposite her, reading Dr. Rook's sealed instructions for the 3rd time. He had not spoken since the road narrowed near the coast. When the carriage stopped beneath the portico, an older woman in a black wool dress came down the steps before the footman could lower them. Your Grace, she said to Catherine first. Her voice was firm without being cold. I am Mrs. Price, housekeeper at Merricliff. Catherine noticed that the woman did not look immediately toward Frederick for approval. Thank you, Catherine said. I would like to see the sea before the light is gone. Frederick folded Rook's instructions. You have travelled for 6 hours. I have sat for 6 hours. That is still exertion. Mrs. Price looked from him to Catherine. There is a western window in the morning room. No stairs are required. Frederick appeared ready to refuse, but Catherine had already stepped from the carriage. The air struck her face with salt and cold. She breathed too deeply, coughed once, and heard every servant near the door go silent. Frederick moved toward her. She lifted one hand. It was the wind. You are shivering. I have just arrived in Cornwall in November. Mrs. Price took Catherine's cloak from the footman and wrapped it more closely around her shoulders. The morning room fire is lit. Inside, Merricliff smelled of peat smoke, old wood, and the sea pressing against the stones below. The western window revealed a narrow terrace, and, beyond it, the cliffs falling toward white water. Catherine crossed the room before Frederick could measure the distance. She placed one hand on the glass. "Open it." The maid beside the curtains hesitated. Frederick unfolded Ruki's paper. "The windows are to remain closed after sunset. Then open the curtain." The maid looked at Mrs. Price. "Her Grace asked for the curtain," the housekeeper said. The heavy fabric moved aside. Fading light entered the room. Catherine remained before it until the horizon disappeared. Behind her, Frederick began giving instructions. Fires were to remain lit in Catherine's rooms. Meals were to be light and frequent. Stairs were to be avoided. A bell would be kept within reach. Mrs. Price listened, then asked, "Has Her Grace approved this arrangement?" Frederick looked at her. "These are Dr. Rook's directions." "That was not my question, Your Grace." Catherine turned. The servants had gone still again, but this silence felt different. Mrs. Price had not challenged rank. She had simply refused to treat Catherine as absent. "I approve fires," Catherine said. "I approve food when I am hungry. I do not approve anyone counting my steps, closing every curtain, or recording each cough." Frederick's expression tightened. "Rook believes observation is necessary." "Then he should have observed me himself." Mrs. Price reached for the instructions. "May I?" Frederick handed them to her. She read quickly. Her eyes paused at the line forbidding prolonged reading, then at the order that Catherine remain in bed after dusk. "My younger sister was treated by such rules," she said. "A physician kept her in a dark room for nearly a year because light was said to excite the nerves. By the end, weakness had become the proof that he was right." Frederick's voice lowered. "Are you questioning Dr. Rook's competence?" "I am questioning whether every rule improves every patient." Catherine felt something loosen inside her. Not trust. The possibility of it. Frederick looked toward the window, where the last light had vanished. "For tonight, the fire remains lit, and the curtains stay open until Her Grace retires." "A generous revolution," Catherine said. His gaze returned to her. "You make every concession sound like an accusation." "Because each concession concerns a freedom I possessed yesterday." He absorbed that without reply. Dinner was served privately. Catherine ate broth, bread, and half a baked apple while Frederick read letters from London. When she asked for cheese, the footman glanced toward him. Frederick nodded. Catherine almost laughed. Must the Duke authorize every crumb? "The servants are uncertain. Because you have told them I am a condition before I am a person." He set down the letter. "I am trying to keep you alive. Then begin by noticing whether I am living." The words ended the meal. Later, unable to sleep, Catherine wrapped herself in the wedding cloak and followed the sound of the sea through the west corridor. The terrace door was unlocked. She stepped outside. Wind pulled at the shortened train of ivory wool, and cold entered her lungs like clean glass. Below, waves broke against the rocks. A signal tower stood farther along the cliff, its bell rope secured beneath a small roof. Catherine walked only as far as the stone balustrade. She rested both hands on it and waited for her breathing to settle. "You should not be here." Frederick's voice came from the doorway. He wore no coat. "Neither should you," she said. "I followed you." "That is not the same as staying." He came closer, though not close enough to touch. Catherine took a clean handkerchief from her sleeve and held it toward him. White linen, no blood. "Look, I see it. At the chapel, you said the other cloth might not be mine. It bore Arabella's initials. And yet you still accepted Ruker's conclusion." Frederick looked toward the sea. "One false object does not prove every observation false." "No, but it should have made you read them." "I will." "When?" When we returned to London, Catherine's laugh was quiet and without humour, conveniently far from the woman described in them. You are not being fair. Fairness is a luxury people request after they have already made the decision. Wind pushed a strand of hair across her face. Frederick lifted one hand, then stopped before touching it. You are cold. I am angry. Both can be true. So can illness and sanity. He looked at her then. The words had reached him, but not far enough. Rook sent another letter before we left, he said. What did it say? That denial, restlessness, and wandering may accompany decline. Catherine closed her eyes for one brief second. Every act became evidence. Obedience proved weakness. Resistance proved confusion. Then there is no behavior available to me that he cannot use. Frederick did not answer. That silence was worse than disagreement. Catherine turned toward the terrace door. He moved beside her, matching her pace. At the threshold, she saw a new iron key in the lock. What is that? The cliff gate will be secured after dark. Why? The path is dangerous. Give the key to Mrs. Price. A spare will remain with her, and the gate, locked at night. Catherine stared at him. You have known me less than 1 day as your wife, and already you are closing exits. I am preventing an accident. You are making an accident impossible to distinguish from imprisonment. His face hardened. The cliffs are not a drawing room disagreement. Neither is my life. For a moment, neither moved. Then Frederick opened the door and waited for her to enter first. In the morning, Catherine learned that he would leave for London. After 2 nights, house credit was under pressure. Lord Ashcombe expected him at a committee meeting. Arabella had written that rumours about the Locksley scandal were spreading again. Frederick explained these things in the library while rain crossed the windows. Catherine sat beside the fire, the silver hourglass untouched on the table. How long will you be gone? She asked. Several weeks, Doctor. Rook predicts I may not have several months. Merricliff is well staffed. That is not what I asked. He looked at her. I cannot remain. Cannot or will not. My responsibilities are not limited to this house, nor is your fear. His restraint broke by the smallest degree. You think I am afraid of you? No, I think you are afraid of witnessing the outcome you purchased. The carriage was called before noon. Frederick gave Mrs. Price written authority to open the cliff gate in an emergency and instructed the steward to send weekly reports. He left Catherine an allowance larger than any she had ever controlled. He arranged for medicines, coal, and fresh food. Every provision was exact. None required his presence. At the front steps, he turned toward her. I will write. Then address the letter to me, not to the physician. He almost answered, but the footman opened the carriage door. Catherine stood in the wedding cloak, while the carriage rolled down the drive and vanished beyond the stone wall. She remained there until the sound of wheels disappeared. Mrs. Price came beside her. Shall I close the door, Your Grace? Catherine looked toward the western corridor. Not yet. They entered the library together. Frederick had left Dr. Rooker's walnut case on the desk, along with the instructions. Mrs. Price produced the spare cliff key from her pocket. Catherine opened the gate first. Cold air swept across the path. Then they returned to the case. Inside, 6 cream fever cards hung from crimson thread. Catherine lifted them toward the light. Each card carried a different date across nearly a year. Each had been pierced in precisely the same 3 places. The holes aligned so perfectly that they formed one dark channel through the entire stack. Catherine touched the newest card, then the oldest. These were not gathered over months, she said. Mrs. Price's face grew grave. No, Beyond the open gate, the sea struck the cliffs below. Catherine laid the cards beside the silver hourglass and turned neither away. Then someone did not merely predict my death, she said. Someone prepared it. 3 winters later, the storm bell rang before dawn, and Frederick Mereworth heard it from inside a carriage he had not expected to stop. The road above Merricliff had vanished beneath hard rain, and the horses strained against wind that drove inland from the sea. His coachman shouted that the western track was flooding. Then the bell sounded again, deep and urgent, from somewhere beyond the cliffs. Frederick lowered the window. Cold rain struck his face. "What signal is that?" he called. The coachman turned on the box. "A vessel near the reef, your grace." Another peal rolled through the dark. Frederick looked toward the black outline of Merricliff House, visible for one instant beneath a flash of lightning. He had come because the London trustees had received reports of rising harbour revenue, but no confirmations bearing a seal they recognized. He had expected neglected accounts, perhaps a failing steward, perhaps proof that Catherine's surviving letters had been exaggerated by coastal isolation. He had not expected the bell. "Take us to the house. The lower drive is blocked." Then stop at the gate. The carriage had not fully halted when Frederick stepped down. Mud closed around his boots. The iron cliff gate stood open, and lanterns moved along the terrace beyond it. Men shouted above the wind. A woman's voice cut through them with calm precision. "Keep the second lamp high. The first is too low for the channel." Frederick crossed the gate and saw her beside the signal tower. Catherine wore a heavy ivory coat, shortened to the knee, its old bridal embroidery visible beneath a practical band of dark wool at the hem. Her hair was pinned beneath a plain hood. Rain shone on her face. One hand held the bell rope, while the other pointed toward the harbour path. Nothing in her posture resembled the woman he had left beside a library fire. Catherine. She did not turn. "3 men to the western line," she called. "Do not pull until the second flare." The bell rope jerked, but the upper wheel did not move. Catherine pulled again. The rope tightened and held. A harbour man shouted that the pulley had jammed. Frederick reached the tower before she could climb the lower step. What must be done? She looked at him then. No gasp, no relief. Only recognition sharpened by 3 years. "The brake pin is swollen in the housing. Lift the iron bar and hold it clear." He obeyed. The bar was heavier than it appeared, cold enough to numb his hand. Catherine climbed 1 step, freed the rope, and pulled twice. The bell answered across the cliffs. Far below, another lamp shifted toward the channel. "Again," she said. Frederick held the bar while she rang the signal in measured strokes. The vessel beyond the reef altered course. Lanterns moved along its deck, then passed slowly towards safer water. The men on the terrace released 1 breath together. Catherine lowered the rope. Only then did she look fully at Frederick. Rain ran from the edge of her hood. "3 winters, your grace." The words contained no welcome. Frederick let the iron bar fall back into place. "You knew the signal. I learned it. You command the harbour men. They listen when the order keeps them alive." A young labourer approached with a coil of wet rope. "The brig has cleared the reef, your grace." He addressed Catherine. Frederick noticed. Catherine thanked him and told him to send dry blankets to the refuge room. The man ran toward the house. Frederick's gaze moved to her right hand. The rope had burned a narrow red line across her palm. "You are hurt." Catherine closed her fingers. "It is nothing. Let me see." She did not move. Frederick heard the command in his own voice and corrected it. "May I see?" Something flickered in her expression. She opened her hand. He did not touch it. The mark was shallow but fresh. "Mrs. Price has salve," Catherine said. "I do not require an examination. I was not offering one. You used to offer them on behalf of absent men." The terrace seemed to narrow between them. Frederick looked at the shortened coat. "That was your wedding cloak. It was too long for cliff work. You cut it. It belonged to me." She turned toward the house. "The storm has not finished. You may come inside, if that is why you returned." The words gave him entry without forgiveness. Frederick followed. Merricliffe's western hall was brighter than he remembered. The curtains stood open, despite the rain. Maps covered one wall. Harbour schedules, tide charts, and wage lists filled the estate room beyond it. Mrs. Price met them with towels and no visible surprise. "Your Grace," she said to Frederick. Then she took Catherine's injured hand and examined it. The rope caught. Only once. Once is enough. Catherine allowed the salve because Mrs. Price asked, not ordered. Frederick watched that difference. A steward entered carrying account books. He was not the man Frederick had appointed 3 years earlier. "Mr. Trelawney," Catherine said, "send the revised tide record to the lower office. The London copy can wait until morning." Trelawney bowed and left. Frederick removed his wet gloves. "The trustees have not received recognized confirmations for 6 months." Catherine looked at him. "They received copies. They say no copies arrived. Then London has misplaced more than my letters." Mrs. Price's hands paused over the bandage. Catherine glanced at her. "Bring the returned packet." The housekeeper crossed to a cabinet and produced a bundle tied with faded blue ribbon. Catherine placed it before Frederick. The envelopes bore her hand, his London direction, and red wax impressed with the private Gresham courier mark. Several had been returned unopened. Others had been slit and resealed. Frederick turned one toward the lamp. "Who authorized this service?" "No one at Merricliff." "Why did you not use the ordinary post?" "I did. The letters were collected from the village, then diverted before reaching London." "How do you know?" "Because the village postmaster recorded every dispatch." Mr. Trelawney compared the dates. Frederick opened the top envelope. Inside, Catherine had written in January 1855 that she remained alive, had dismissed the draft prescribed by Rook after it left her unable to stand, and wished Frederick to return. The second, written months later, said she could walk the western terrace without fever. The third asked why no answer had come. The fourth did not ask anything. It simply reported harbour storm damage and the need for roof repairs. Frederick looked up. "I never received these. I know that now. You believed I ignored them." "For 2 winters." Her tone did not rise. That made the words harder. By the third, belief no longer mattered. Mrs. Price finished binding Catherine's hand and left them in the estate room with the door open. Frederick saw the silver hourglass on a shelf beside the ledgers. Dust had not gathered on it, but it was no longer near Catherine's chair. "You kept it. It keeps time accurately." "Did you use it at first?" Catherine moved to the long table. 3 minutes standing. 3 minutes walking. 3 minutes before someone told me effort would kill me. And then I stopped turning it. Frederick looked at her face, the strength in her shoulders, the steadiness of her breathing. "How did you recover?" "Gradually." Rook said the decline was irreversible. "Doctor, Penrose found scars from pleurisy and weakness, made worse by confinement, poor food, and medicines that lowered my pulse." "Penrose?" "A physician from Truro. He examined me in daylight. He asked what I felt before reading what another man had written." Frederick looked again at the letters. Why did you not come to London? Because I had no wish to arrive at a house where my survival would be treated as misconduct. She crossed to another cabinet and removed the walnut medical case. Frederick recognized it immediately. Catherine opened it and placed the 6 crimson thread cards in a row. These were supposedly written across nearly a year. She held them against the lamp. The needle holes align. The older cards bear ink no more faded than the newest. One says, "I suffered high fever on a day I remember signing the marriage settlement before 6 witnesses." Frederick lifted that card. "You are certain of the date?" "I remember because my uncle complained my hand was steadier than his." The next card recorded a hemorrhage on the wedding morning. Catherine placed Arabella's handkerchief beside it. Frederick had preserved it in a sealed packet. The blue initials remained visible. "The blood was not mine," she said. "You knew enough to keep the cloth." Frederick looked at the cards and felt the structure of his certainty begin to break. Why did Rook do this? That is one question. And the other? Catherine rested her bandaged hand beside the returned letters. Why did Arabella need you to believe it? The storm bell gave one final, distant stroke as the wind began to ease. Frederick looked through the open door toward the western windows, then back at the woman he had left under orders designed for dying. Catherine met his gaze without softness and without fear. "They did not merely mistake my illness," she said. "They wrote my death because someone had already decided to need it." The harbour lease had been drafted 6 days before Catherine's wedding. Frederick found the date first. Catherine found the clause. They stood on opposite sides of the long estate table while morning light moved across the old paper, revealing the faint blue ruling beneath the ink. The draft bore no final seal, but the names were clear enough. Gresham and Company would receive control of the Western storage rights at Merricliff upon the death of Catherine Merworth, or upon certification that she lacked the capacity to administer property under her separate use. Frederick read the sentence twice. This was prepared before the settlement amendment, before anyone knew whether I would control Merricliff. Catherine said, "Someone knew enough." Arabella attended the discussions. She attended the room. That is not the same as having the final clause. Frederick's jaw tightened. My solicitor had the draft 2 days earlier. Then either his office spoke or someone expected the amendment before I demanded it. Catherine placed one finger beside the date. The concern behind this lease was already waiting for my death or incapacity. A useful second door if the first failed to open. The storm had passed, but the windows still shuddered beneath the wind. Frederick looked toward the returned letters, then back at the lease. Why the Western stores? Because they control access to the lower harbour road and the bonded warehouse. The warehouse was nearly empty when I last saw it. It was losing money because the roof leaked and no one repaired it. Catherine opened a single ledger and turned it toward him. I used the first profitable fishing season to replace the roof. Then we offered storage to merchants unwilling to pay the rates at Falmouth. The entries were plain: repair costs, wages, carriage fees, rental income. Frederick traced the numbers without touching them. The revenue doubled, then doubled again. You did this while the trustees believed the estate inactive. I sent every quarterly statement. To London, yes, and they vanished with your letters. Catherine closed the ledger. Someone did not merely need me weak. They needed Merricliff to appear unmanaged. The implication settled between them. A dying duchess justified transfer. An incapable one justified control. A competent one who restored the harbour destroyed both stories. Frederick looked again at the lease. You believe Arabella planned this before the marriage. I believe she prepared for every outcome except my recovery. That is not proof. No, it is motive. He met her eyes. You refuse to claim more than you can establish. Easy certainty is how I was buried. A knock sounded at the estate room door. Mrs. Price entered with Dr. Penrose, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s whose coat still carried rein at the cuffs. He bowed first to Catherine, then to Frederick. Your Graces. Frederick indicated the chair near the fire. You examined the Duchess during her recovery, several times over 2 years. Catherine remained standing. Dr. Penrose has agreed to answer questions in Mrs. Price's presence. The condition was not directed only at the physician. Frederick understood. When did you first see her? January of 1855. What condition was she in? Thin, weak from prolonged confinement, easily breathless, and frightened of exertion because she had been told movement could kill her. Penrose's voice carried no drama. There were signs of serious pleurisy in the past. I found no indication that death within months had been certain. Could she have recovered from such an illness? Yes, without a miracle. Most recoveries are not miracles, Your Grace. They are time, nourishment, air, and the removal of whatever keeps making the patient worse. Catherine looked toward the dark corridor beyond the open door. The room where she had spent the first winter waited at its end. She had not entered it in months. The fever cards and early medicine bottles remained locked in a cabinet there. The original prescriptions are still in my old chamber, she said. Mrs. Price started to move. Catherine stopped her with a glance. I will fetch them. She crossed the corridor. Frederick followed 2 steps behind, then halted when she reached the threshold. The door stood open. Inside, heavy curtains covered the sea-facing windows. The bed had been stripped, but the room still held the faint bitter smell of camphor and stale lavender. Catherine placed her hand on the frame. For one winter, that doorway had marked the edge of the world permitted to her. Meals arrived on trays. Curtains opened by inches. Every cough had been written down. Every request to walk had been called agitation. Her breath shortened before she could prevent it. Frederick moved closer. Catherine, she did not turn. Do not enter unless I ask. He stopped. No protest, no explanation. She heard nothing behind her except his breathing. Catherine stepped into the room alone. The floorboards gave beneath her weight, exactly as they had 3 years earlier. She crossed to the cabinet, unlocked it, and removed 2 small brown bottles and a folded instruction sheet. When she turned back, Frederick still stood outside. He had not crossed the threshold. That obedience affected her more than an apology would have. She returned to the estate room and set the bottles before Penrose. He uncorked one, smelled it, and frowned. Laudanum with antimonial wine. Frederick looked at him. Dangerous? Not automatically. The dose matters. Given repeatedly to a weakened patient, it could lower the pulse, dull appetite, cause confusion, and make standing difficult. Catherine unfolded Ruki's instructions. 3 doses daily. Penrose read the line. That is more than I would have prescribed without regular examination. Rook did not examine her for how long? Frederick asked. I cannot answer for him. Catherine did. The final 8 weeks before the wedding. Frederick looked at her. You are certain? I saw him across rooms. He read attendants' notes. He touched my wrist twice. Penrose replaced the cork. Then his certainty exceeded his observation. Silence followed. The accusation did not need embellishment. Frederick turned toward Catherine. I left you here under those instructions. Yes, I believed I was providing care. You provided an arrangement. I was wrong. Catherine's expression did not change. An apology does not turn absence into an accident. I know. Do you? He looked toward the corridor and the room he had not entered. I am beginning to, Mrs. Price brought the lease draft nearer to Penrose, though the physician did not touch it. Frederick read the incapacity clause again. If Rouquet's summary had been accepted by the trustees, this transfer might have proceeded even if Catherine lived. Only if I were declared unable to manage Merricliff, Catherine said, which explains the language now appearing in London about missing confirmations. Frederick lifted his head. You think the trustees are being prepared to question your judgment. I think whoever intercepted my letters also intercepted proof that I managed the estate. Then we need every account, every post record, and every medical note. We? Catherine asked. The single word stopped him. He corrected himself. You need them. I can help gather what London withheld. Under conditions. Name them. You remain here for 3 days. Agreed. You may examine copies. No original paper leaves Merricliff without my permission. Agreed. You do not question servants alone. Frederick hesitated. If one of them is involved, then fear will make them useful to whoever frightened them first. He considered that, then nodded. Agreed. Doctor, Penrose answers to his own judgment, not your title. Agreed. And you do not treat me as evidence in a case about your reputation. The words landed harder than the rest. Frederick looked at her for a long moment. What should I treat you as? Catherine rested one hand on the closed ledger. The owner of the house in which you are standing. Something in his face shifted. It was not offense. It was recognition arriving too late to be comfortable. Then I ask the owner's permission to continue. For 3 days. For 3 days, Penrose gathered his gloves. Mrs. Price escorted him out, leaving the lease, the medicine bottles, and the returned letters on the table. Frederick remained across from Catherine. If Arabella knew the settlement terms before the wedding, she had help inside my household. Yes. If Rook prepared the incapacity language, he expected your death might not come quickly enough. Yes. And if the trustees never saw your accounts, someone has been preserving the appearance of failure for 3 years. Catherine looked toward the western windows, where the harbour roofs glinted beneath a clearing sky. That appearance was useful only while I remained silent. Frederick placed both hands on the table, careful not to touch any document. Where do we begin? Catherine slid the lease draft toward him, stopping it before it crossed into his reach. With the date, she said. Find out who expected to inherit my silence before I had even spoken my vows. Ellen Ward began to cry before Catherine asked her a single question. The former maid stood just inside the estate room, with rain darkening the hem of her plain brown dress, her hands clasped so tightly that the knuckles showed white. Catherine had placed the blood-stained handkerchief on the table before Ellen entered. The pale blue initials faced upward. Frederick remained near the window. Mrs. Price stood beside the door, and Catherine's solicitor sat at a smaller desk with clean paper ready. No one had told Ellen what evidence would be shown. Her reaction did not require prompting. You recognize it, Catherine said. Ellen looked at the handkerchief, then at Catherine's face. Yes, Your Grace. Sit down. I'd rather stand. Then stand. Catherine did not soften her voice, but neither did she use rank to force compliance. Tell me how Lady Arabella's handkerchief came to be folded with my linen on the morning of my wedding. Ellen's breath shook. She gave it to me in the passage outside the dressing room. Frederick moved away from the window. With blood already on it? Ellen flinched. Catherine looked at him. He stopped. Answer me, Catherine said. Yes, Your Grace. It was already stained. Did she say whose blood it was? She said it came from the kitchen, from meat being prepared for the breakfast. Mrs. Price's expression hardened, but she remained silent. Catherine rested both hands on the table, keeping the bandaged one flat. Why did she ask you to carry it? She said the marriage might fail if anyone thought you were stronger. Ellen swallowed. She said the Duke needed the scandal ended, and that everyone had sacrificed too much for you to become difficult at the last moment. Frederick's face went still. Catherine saw the words strike him, but she did not look away from Ellen. What exactly were you told to do? Fold it beneath the clean linen. Let it fall near your chair. Dr. Rook would see it. And then nothing. I was told not to speak unless someone asked where I found it. Which is what happened. Yes. Did you believe it would be used as proof that I had coughed blood? Ellen's eyes filled again. Not proof. Not like that. Lady Arabella said it would only remind people not to delay. She said everyone already knew you were dying. The sentence entered the room with a quiet cruelty greater than accusation. Catherine felt the wedding breakfast return in fragments. 12 guests watching her mouth. Rook rising before she had spoken. Frederick reading a summary instead of the cards beneath it. Did you believe I was dying? She asked. Ellen looked ashamed. Everyone said so. That was not my question. Yes, Ellen whispered. I believed it. Catherine nodded once. And because you believed it, accuracy seemed less important. Ellen covered her mouth with one hand. I'm sorry. Frederick stepped forward. Who else knew? Ellen recoiled. I don't know. You carried false evidence into a ducal wedding. Someone instructed you. Someone prepared it. You will name every person involved. His voice did not rise, but command filled the room. Ellen's fear became immediate and visible. Catherine turned toward him. No. Frederick looked at her. She has information. Then fear will make her repeat whatever she thinks preserves her employment. She is no longer employed in my household. Exactly. Catherine moved around the table and placed herself between Ellen and Frederick without making a display of it. Protection is not frightening a witness until she becomes useful. The rebuke landed. Frederick's jaw tightened. For a moment, Catherine expected him to argue. Instead, he stepped back. You are right. Ellen stared at him, then at Catherine, as though neither response fit the world she knew. Catherine returned to her place. You will not be dismissed from your present position for telling the truth here. My solicitor will record that protection. No member of the Gresham family may contact you directly without his knowledge. Ellen's lips parted. You'd do that for me. I am not doing it instead of consequence. I am doing it so consequence reaches the right people. Catherine glanced toward the solicitor. He began to write. Now tell me what else Lady Arabella asked you to carry. Ellen hesitated. A packet. Frederick did not move this time. Catherine waited. What kind of packet? Cream papers folded in half, tied with crimson thread. The room changed. Catherine felt it before anyone spoke. Where did you take them? To Dr. Rook's office in Brook Street. When? 2 days before the wedding. Did you see what was written? Only the top page. There were dates and notes about fever. Catherine looked at the 6 cards. Did the pages already have needle holes? Ellen closed her eyes, searching memory. I think so. 3 holes, 1 near each upper corner and 1 lower down. Mrs. Price drew a slow breath. Frederick looked toward the cards, then back at Ellen. "Who gave you the packet?" Catherine asked. "Lady Arabella." "Did she say where it came from?" "No. She said Dr. Rook had been waiting for it." "Did Dr. Rook receive it himself?" "His clerk did. Name, Mr. Bellamy. I don't know his Christian name." Catherine's solicitor wrote it down. "Was anyone else present?" "No." "Did Lady Arabella speak of a nurse with the initials E.M.?" Ellen frowned. No nurse by that name worked in the house. Catherine lifted one of the cards. The letters E.M. appeared beneath two supposed bedside observations. "Did any nurse attend me in the final weeks?" "No. Your aunt said a nurse would create gossip. It was mostly me, Miss Harcourt, and Lady Arabella when she chose to visit." "Miss Harcourt, your companion, she left after the wedding. And she saw me cough blood." "Not that morning. Did anyone?" Ellen shook her head. "No." Catherine placed the card down. "After the breakfast, did Lady Arabella ask about the handkerchief?" Ellen nodded quickly. "She asked whether you had noticed the initials." "I said I didn't know. She said it didn't matter because you'd be too confused to remember." Frederick turned toward the fireplace. His hand closed once at his side. Catherine watched him master his anger rather than use it. That restraint mattered, although she would not reward it yet. "There is one more thing," Ellen said. "After I delivered the packet, Lady Arabella told me not to worry. She said Dr. Rook would make the notes respectable." The solicitor stopped writing for half a second, then continued. Catherine looked at the physician's signature on the summary page. "Respectable," she repeated. Ellen began to cry again, more quietly now. "I thought it was only to keep the wedding from breaking apart. I didn't think you'd be sent away because of it." "I was sent away because many people found the story convenient," Catherine said. "You helped carry one part of it." Ellen bowed her head. "I know. Then tell the truth when the room is larger and the people inside it are less kind." "I will." The formal statement took nearly an hour. Ellen signed each page after it was read aloud. Catherine required the solicitor to add a clause securing temporary lodging if the Greshams interfered with her employment. Frederick said nothing until Ellen had been escorted out by Mrs. Price. Then he moved to the table and looked at the crimson cards without touching them. I would have frightened her into silence. Yes, I thought rank would protect the truth. Rank protects whoever controls it. He looked at Catherine. "You used yours differently." "Because I know what it is to be trapped beneath someone else's certainty." The answer left no room for compliment. Frederick accepted that. "Bellamy may still be in London." "Then find him, your solicitor or mine." "Mine." Agreed. Catherine gathered Ellen's signed statement and placed it beneath the handkerchief packet. The cards no longer depend only on paper. They depend on a servant's word. A servant's word is evidence when society has not trained itself to ignore it. Frederick's gaze held hers for a moment. "You are preparing to return to London?" "Not yet." A servant entered carrying a damp packet delivered by express courier. Mrs. Price followed close behind, her face grave. "A London broadsheet, Your Grace." Catherine broke the seal. The headline announced that the Duchess of St. Aldwyn had fabricated a miraculous recovery, forged harbour accounts, and divert Mercliffe revenues while suffering instability after prolonged fever. An unnamed family friend expressed concern that Catherine's resentment toward those who had cared for her might place the estate at risk. Frederick read over her shoulder. "They know we are asking questions." Catherine folded the paper once with exact care. "No." She looked at the words unstable, forged, and dangerous arranged beneath her name. "They know the dying wife failed. Now they are preparing the unfit one. London received Catherine with rain, silence, and a calling card withdrawn before she had even removed her gloves. The carriage stopped before Mareworth House shortly after noon. Curtains shifted in the houses opposite. A footman opened the door, then looked past Catherine toward Frederick, as though uncertain who should descend first. Catherine stepped down without waiting. She wore dark blue wool, a plain bonnet, and the wedding ring she had never removed. Frederick followed, carrying no visible papers. The evidence case remained in Catherine's hand. Inside the hall, a servant approached with a silver tray. One card lay face down upon it. "Lady Westbury's man returned this, Your Grace," he said. Catherine turned the card over. The corner had been folded, a quiet social signal that the caller no longer wished to be received. Frederick's mouth hardened. "Send it back." Catherine looked at him. "No, she intends an insult. Then let the insult remain hers." She placed the card on the tray. "Do not teach the household to hide what society is doing." The trustee meeting had already assembled in the long morning room. Lord Ashcombe stood near the fire with 3 trustees, Dr. Rook and Arabella Gresham. Catherine's solicitor occupied a chair near the wall. A second chair had been placed for Catherine several feet from the central table, lower than the others, and angled toward the door. She stopped when she saw it. No one spoke. Then Catherine crossed the room, took hold of the chair back, and drew it across the carpet until it stood level with the table. The scrape sounded louder than any greeting. She sat. Frederick chose the chair beside her rather than the one at the head. Arabella noticed. "Catherine," she said softly, "we have all been deeply concerned. Concern has become remarkably efficient since the broadsheet." Lord Ashcombe opened a folder. "This meeting concerns disputed harbour statements, intercepted correspondence, and the proposed Western lease. No judgment has been reached. Then perhaps my chair was misplaced by accident." One trustee looked down. Another cleared his throat. The eldest spoke. "The London office has not certified several transactions bearing your seal. Until the signatures and supporting records are examined, the trustees cannot approve the Western Warehouse lease or advance further credit against expected revenues." "The warehouse is operating," Catherine said. "The wages are paid. The merchants have receipts, which we have not verified." Because the copies were diverted, she placed the returned letters and sealed account packets on the table. Every dispatch bears the Gresham courier mark. Arabella folded her hands. Many households use that service. Not from Merricliff. No one there authorized it. Rook leaned forward. Persistent suspicion may follow prolonged fever. A patient can become fixed upon an explanation that gives order to distress. Catherine turned toward him. "You have not examined me in more than 3 years. I examined you repeatedly before the marriage, not during the final 8 weeks." A brief pause followed. Rook recovered quickly. "I received reliable reports." "From whom?" "Your attendants. Name the nurse who signed EM." His expression altered by less than a breath. "Records from that period are incomplete. The initials appear on 2 cards you presented as original bedside observations." Lord Ashcombe lifted one hand. "This gathering is not intended to become a medical confrontation." "Then Dr. Rook should not use medicine to discredit my account of missing property records." Catherine's voice remained even. "He cannot call my anger a symptom and then ask the room to ignore what caused it." Arabella looked toward Frederick. "Surely you can see that this tone proves the difficulty." Frederick shifted, but Catherine placed one hand on the table before he could speak. Do not close the meeting. He looked at her. They are insulting you. Then let them do it clearly. She faced Arabella. What difficulty? Arabella's expression became almost compassionate. You returned after 3 years accusing a physician, a family friend, several clerks, and the trustees. You speak as though everyone who tried to protect you was part of a design. Protection does not require forged symptoms. That has not been proved. Catherine removed Ellen Ward's sworn statement and set it beside the blood-stained handkerchief, now sealed in linen. The maid who carried this cloth says you gave it to her before the wedding breakfast. Arabella's eyes went to the initials. A frightened servant can be taught to remember anything. She also remembers carrying crimson thread notes to Ruki's office. Ruki's face tightened. That is hearsay. Then produce the original attendant records. He did not answer. The youngest trustee reached toward the packet of returned letters. May, Catherine nodded. He examined the seal, then the dispatch dates. These appear to have been opened and resealed. Some were, Catherine said. Others were returned unopened. Arabella gave a small sigh. Even if mistakes occurred in private carriage, they do not establish that Her Grace's present account is sound. My account is supported by harbour ledgers, merchant receipts, tide records, and witnesses, all under your control. Catherine looked at her. You expected no control to remain mine. The room chilled around the words. Lord Ashcombe stepped in. No one wishes to diminish your authority, Duchess. The trustees merely require certainty. You had certainty when I was expected to die. That is unfair. It is exact. Rook drew a paper from his case. There is another matter. A letter written in Her Grace's own hand contains language of pronounced resentment. She wrote that she would not die where they placed her. Arabella's gaze sharpened. Catherine remembered the sentence. She had written it in the first winter, before hope became humiliating. I did write that. A quiet stir moved through the room. Rook continued. Such language may reflect a fixed determination to punish those associated with her former illness, or a fixed determination to live. The distinction is precisely what requires examination. Catherine looked toward Frederick. He had gone very still. She knew what the room expected. Rank, command, a husband's declaration that would make every fact she brought appear dependent upon his favor. She turned back to the trustees. You may examine every account. You may compare every seal. You may question every witness who signed a tide record or wage book, but you will not use one angry sentence to erase 3 years of work. The eldest trustee folded his hands. Until that examination, we propose delaying certification of the Western lease. The Gresham lease, any disputed lease. Then let the delay stand, Catherine said. Frederick looked at her. That will restrict planned repairs. For a time. You should not have to accept that. I am not accepting their doubt. I am removing their excuse. She addressed the solicitor. Prepare a request for an inquiry in Truro concerning the false medical declarations, the diversion of correspondence, and the original harbour transfer instructions. Lord Ashcombe frowned. A public inquiry will spread the scandal. The scandal has already been printed. It may damage the House of Mereworth. Catherine looked at Frederick, then back at Ashcombe. Truth has already damaged me. I will not protect a house by remaining the only person required to carry the cost. Arabella's voice softened. Catherine, think carefully. Society forgives illness. It does not easily forgive obsession. Catherine met her eyes. Society forgave my expected death because it was convenient. She gathered the fever cards and laid them in one line across the table. Now it may learn the inconvenience of my testimony. Frederick rose. Every person in the room turned toward him. Catherine felt the old fear tighten in her chest. Would he end the meeting? Would he take command and transform her case into his protection? He did neither. He moved his chair half a foot closer to hers, then remained standing beside it. "The inquiry will proceed," he said. "Her Grace's solicitor will hold the original papers. Mine will provide every document from the London office." Lord Ashcombe stared at him. "You understand what public alignment may cost. I understand what private silence has already cost." Catherine looked at Frederick. The answer mattered. It was not yet enough. Arabella saw that too. "Belief is easy in this room," she said. "Wait until he must say it before men who control his credit and his future." Catherine closed the evidence case. "I intend to." She stood, leaving the withdrawn calling card, the delayed lease, and the trustees' discomfort where they belonged. At the door, she turned once. "You may examine my records," she said. "You may not examine my existence, as though survival itself were suspicious." Then she left the room with Frederick beside her, not ahead. Behind them, Arabella's voice dropped too low to hear. Catherine did not need the words. The next attack had already been named. It would not ask whether she had lived. It would ask whether a woman who refused to disappear could be trusted with a life she had reclaimed. Lord Ashcombe's ultimatum arrived before breakfast, sealed in black wax, and written in the language of consequence. Frederick read it once in the morning room, then placed it beside Catherine's untouched tea. Rain pressed against the windows, and the fire burned low enough that the room felt colder than it was. "If I support the inquiry before the trustees, receive Rook's clerk, and the original transfer papers, Ashcombe will withdraw from the committee," he said. Catherine looked at the letter but did not reach for it. "That is political loss. It is more than that. 2 merchants who extend credit against Mareworth revenues have tied their confidence to his support. If he withdraws, payments may be delayed. At Merricliff, possibly. Wages, not immediately, but repairs, supplies, and advances could be restricted." Catherine lowered her eyes to the tea. There it was, the old bargain, dressed in better clothes, her truth on one side, other people's security on the other. And what does he require? A statement that the disputed records remain unresolved and that I will not endorse your judgment publicly until the inquiry. He wants your silence. He calls it caution. Men often rename cowardice before asking someone else to pay for it. Frederick absorbed the words. He did not defend Ashcombe. "I will not sign anything that suggests you are unfit. That is not the same as saying you believe me. I do believe you. Here." Catherine looked around the morning room. With the door closed, the servants dismissed, and no man of consequence listening. Frederick crossed to the writing desk. A leather portfolio lay there, filled with copies of her intercepted letters, courier receipts, and correspondence from his London office. He opened it, reviewed the first page, then called for the house solicitor. Catherine remained silent while the man entered. Frederick did not look toward her for approval before. He began, but neither did he act as though the papers belonged to him. "Prepare an instruction transferring custody of all correspondence related to Her Grace, Merricliff, Dr. Rook, and Gresham and Company to Her Grace's solicitor," he said. "No copy is to be removed, altered, or retained by my private office without written authorization from the Duchess." The solicitor hesitated. "Your Grace," That would limit your ability to respond if the committee requests. Then, the committee may request the papers from the person whose life they concern. Catherine looked at Frederick. This was not a promise. It was a loss of control, made before she had forgiven him. The solicitor bowed. "Very good, Your Grace." Frederick added, "Prepare a second instruction. No servant, clerk, or witness connected to the inquiry is to be dismissed, questioned alone, or contacted by the Gresham household without counsel present." At once. When the solicitor left, Catherine said, "That will anger Ashcombe." "Yes, and your office." "Yes, you did not ask whether I would think better of you." Frederick turned toward her. "I am trying to stop making truth a bargain." The answer reached her, despite every reason to resist it. She moved toward the window and found herself measuring the distance to the door. The habit had begun at Merricliff during the months when every room had rules and every exit required permission. Frederick noticed. Without speaking, he crossed behind her and opened the morning room door wider. Then he stepped away from it. Catherine felt the change before she understood it. The path was clear. "You saw that," she said. "Yes, most people would call it nervousness. Most people were not locked behind a cliff gate." His voice held no defense. Catherine turned. "You locked it. I know. You called it safety. I know. And then you left." Frederick's hand rested on the back of a chair. "I told myself I was unlike my father because I did not gamble, lie, or spend beyond the estate. I believed duty made me honorable." Catherine said nothing. He continued. "When the Locksley investments failed and Mereworth funds were named beside them, I thought every rumor proved that ruin had reached me anyway. Marriage ended the accusation. Your illness made the ending seem temporary. So you married a dying woman because permanence frightened you. Yes, the honesty had no ornament. And when you brought me to Merricliff, I believed. The house, the staff, the money, and Ruki's instructions were care. They were substitutes for witnessing what you had done." Frederick's eyes lowered. "Yes." Catherine looked back toward the open door. "I waited for you in the first winter." His face changed. She had not planned to give him that truth. Once spoken, it demanded the rest. Every carriage on the upper road. Every letter carried through the hall. Every time Mrs. Price paused outside my room. I thought perhaps you had returned. Frederick did not move. "Catherine, do not apologize yet." He closed his mouth. "By the second winter, I stopped listening for wheels. By the third, I understood that hope had become another closed room. I left it before it could lock from the outside." The fire shifted behind them. Frederick's breathing changed, but he did not approach. "I believed your letters would have come through ordinary post if they mattered," he said. "That is a cruel sentence." "It is, because you decided the silence proved I had nothing worth saying." "Yes." He did not soften it. "I was wrong." Catherine looked at him. "You keep saying that as though naming the wrong is the same as repairing it." "It is not." He reached inside his coat and removed a folded letter bearing Lord Ashcombe's seal. "I have refused his wording." Catherine took the paper. Frederick's answer was brief. He would not describe his wife's judgment as unsettled. He would support examination of the documents. He would not permit Merricliff authority to be routed through him during the dispute. The line carried consequences because it left no space for later denial. "You sent this?" she asked. "An hour ago." "Before showing me?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because asking whether you approved would have made your approval part of the price." Catherine folded the letter. There was something dangerous in the steadiness of him now. Not the old certainty, a more difficult thing. humility beginning to take form. And if the merchants withdraw, I will meet the wages from other revenues. Even if the repairs stop, the Western storehouse repairs will continue. I have already instructed the steward. You decided quickly. I delayed for 3 years. The answer almost undid her. She moved toward the table and placed the letter beside the intercepted correspondence. Frederick remained where he was. I believe you, he said. Not only that the cards are false, I believe you understood your own body. I believe you managed Wycliffe. I believe the anger in your letters belongs to a sane woman who had been denied an answer. Catherine's breath caught. For 3 winters, she had wanted those words from him. Their lateness did not erase their weight. It made them heavier. Frederick lifted one hand, then stopped before crossing the space between them. May I? She knew what he asked. Not ownership, not absolution. Permission to touch her hand. Catherine looked at the distance between his fingers and hers. No. He lowered his hand immediately. Not yet, she added. His eyes met hers. I understand. Do you? I am learning to. The house solicitor returned carrying a second packet. The instructions are executed, Your Grace. There is also this. He handed Frederick a sealed notice from Lord Ashcombe. Frederick opened it and read, The trustees have called a preliminary dinner tomorrow evening. A dinner, Catherine said, so they may pretend judgment tastes better with silver. Ashcombe wants my declaration before they agree to release further credit against the estate revenues. Will Arabella be there? Yes. And Rook? Yes. Catherine crossed to the shelf and took down the silver hourglass. She turned it once. White sand began to fall. Frederick watched her, but he did not ask what she meant. Tomorrow, she said, you will have a full room, a threatened estate, and men who can punish you for choosing badly. I know. Then tomorrow we will learn whether you believe me before the evidence becomes safe enough to admire. The preliminary dinner had been arranged to look less like judgment than hospitality. Silver covers gleamed beneath the chandeliers. Crystal caught the firelight. 6 trustees sat between Lord Ashcombe and Dr. Rook, while Arabella occupied the place at Frederick's right, as though old habit still granted her influence. Catherine entered on Frederick's arm because the room expected it, then withdrew her hand before they reached the table. He did not attempt to reclaim it. A folded declaration waited beside his plate. No one mentioned it during the first course. That silence made it the only object anyone truly saw. Catherine sat opposite Rook. The household keys rested at her waist, their weight familiar beneath her hand. She had carried them through storms, wage disputes, broken roofs, and nights when the locked doors of Wycliffe had felt more dangerous than the cliffs outside. The eldest trustee waited until the servants withdrew before opening the matter. Your Grace, we have prepared language that should preserve confidence while the Truro inquiry proceeds. Frederick looked at the declaration. Read it. Lord Ashcombe unfolded the paper. His Grace acknowledges that several transactions connected to Wycliffe remain uncertified, and agrees that no public declaration concerning their validity shall be issued for 48 hours, pending receipt of the final witness and the original transfer instructions. Catherine heard the care in the wording. It did not call her unfit. It did not call her dishonest. It merely asked truth to wait until men with money felt safer. And during those 48 hours, she asked. The eldest trustee answered, existing wages may continue. No new credit will be advanced against anticipated harbour revenue. The Western repairs? Delayed. The refuge supplies? Delayed unless covered from another account. Frederick placed one hand beside the document. I will cover both from Mareworth revenues. Lord Ashcombe's expression tightened. That is not the only concern. If you publicly endorse every disputed signature before Mr. Bellamy appears, the merchants may withdraw accommodation from the wider estate. I have already refused to describe my wife's judgment as doubtful. This declaration does not require that. It requires silence. For 2 days. Arabella lifted her glass but did not drink. 2 days is hardly abandonment. Catherine looked at her. No, it is merely the belief that a woman's truth may be postponed when powerful men find the timing inconvenient. Arabella's smile sharpened. You make every practical delay sound like cruelty, because cruelty often arrives carrying a ledger. Rook folded his napkin. This tone will not reassure anyone concerned by the effects of prolonged fever. Catherine turned toward him. My tone has never been the evidence. It has only been the excuse. Frederick picked up the declaration. I will not sign any version that questions Catherine's capacity. Lord Ashcombe leaned forward. It does not. Then remove her name entirely. The matter concerns her accounts. The matter concerns whether merchants trust the house while accusations remain unresolved. Frederick read the wording again. Catherine watched his face. He believed her. She knew that now. The danger lay elsewhere. He also believed he could protect every interest if given enough time, enough paper, enough careful language. That was how he had left Marecliff. Not because he wanted her gone, but because he had believed provision could replace presence. What happens if you refuse? She asked. Frederick looked at her. Ashcombe resigns tonight. 2 merchants may suspend further accommodation by morning. And if you accept, the inquiry proceeds. Bellamy arrives. The transfer instructions are secured. Then I issue a full declaration. When it is safer, when it is harder to dismiss. Catherine felt the room close around the distinction. Frederick's intention was not cowardly in the simple sense. It was worse for them because it was reasonable. He wanted truth protected by proof. She needed truth defended before proof removed the cost. Arabella saw the hesitation and moved at once. Even Frederick understands that certainty must come before spectacle. I am certain, he said. Then say it now, Catherine replied. I have. To me, to Ashcombe in writing, not to the room that will leave here and describe my future before midnight. Lord Ashcombe exhaled. Duchess, no one here wishes to question your character. Then, why is my husband's silence being purchased? It is not silence. It is restraint. Catherine looked at Frederick. That word has already cost me 3 winters. His face changed. This is not the same. No, this time you know I am alive. The words passed through the room like a blade drawn without violence. Frederick rose halfway from his chair, then stopped. At the far end, Catherine's solicitor remained absent. Bellamy had not arrived. The original transfer instructions were still somewhere between London and Truro. Frederick looked toward the clock. One more witness. One more document. One more night before the truth became defensible enough to carry no shame for those who accepted it. Arabella set down her glass. His Grace's caution is painful, perhaps, but sensible. Frederick turned toward her. Do not speak for me, then speak. The challenge was deliberate. Catherine waited. Frederick looked back at the declaration. I will not sign this wording, he said. Relief rose in Catherine before he continued. But I will delay the public statement for 48 hours. I will cover Marecliffe's wages and repairs from other revenues. No authority passes from Catherine. No signature is invalidated. Lord Ashcombe sat back. It was a compromise that preserved almost everything except the thing Catherine had asked him to risk. She reached for the household keys. Their metal struck softly against the chain at her waist. Frederick heard it. "What are you doing?" She removed them one by one. The Merricliffe office, the Western storehouse, the refuge room, the cliff gate. During the first winter, she had slept with them beneath her pillow, because they were the only proof that a door in her own house could open from her side. She placed them beside Frederick's unsigned declaration. "I am removing the appearance that I remain here because you permit it." His face lost color. "Catherine, you believe me." "Yes, but you still believe belief may be timed for convenience." "I am protecting the people who depend upon the estate by asking me to absorb the only cost that cannot be entered in an account. That is not what I am asking. It is what you are doing." The trustees had stopped pretending not to listen. Rook watched with clinical attention. Arabella's stillness held satisfaction. Catherine would not give her collapse. She rose. "Mrs. Price's widowed sister lives in Truro. I will stay there until the inquiry." Frederick stood fully. "The roads are poor. I crossed them when no one expected me to return. You cannot travel alone. My solicitor will arrange the carriage." "Take mine." "No, at least take guards." Catherine held his gaze. "I will decide what I require." He stopped. The old Duke might have commanded. The man before her did not. "I love you," he said. The room vanished for one terrible second. Catherine heard again the first winter's wheels that never turned into the drive, the letters unanswered, the curtains closed against the sea. She had wanted those words before she knew survival could become a life of its own. Their arrival now did not make them false. It made them insufficient. "Then learn what love costs," she said, "before asking me to live upon it." Frederick's breath left slowly. He did not reach for her. Catherine removed the Mereworth jewels from her wrists and placed them beside the keys. The wedding ring remained. It had been placed there during a bargain, but she had carried it through every choice afterward. Arabella noticed. "You intend to make a spectacle of leaving." Catherine looked at her. "No, I intend to leave before staying becomes another performance arranged for your comfort." She took the evidence case from beside her chair. At the door, Frederick followed only as far as the hall. Rain sounded against the front steps. Catherine's solicitor had just arrived, wet from the road, and apologizing that Bellamy had failed to meet him at the appointed inn. Catherine gave him no time to explain. "You will take me to Truro." He bowed. "Yes, Your Grace." Frederick stood beneath the hall lamps. "I will come tomorrow." "Come to the inquiry." "Not to you?" "Not yet." He accepted the answer without argument. The carriage carried Catherine west through the night. Near midnight, in the narrow parlour of Mrs. Price's sister, Mrs. Price unwrapped an old harbour ledger in oilcloth. "I remembered this on the road," she said. Catherine opened it. One entry bore her signature and the marks of 6 harbour men. On that same date, a crimson thread card recorded that she had been unconscious for 36 hours. Catherine placed the card beside the ledger. The contradiction did not depend upon memory, marriage, or a duke's belief. It belonged to the sea, the wages paid, and the men who had lived because she was awake. Catherine looked toward the dark window. Frederick had asked for 48 hours. She would use them to build a truth that no one could postpone again. The fever card said Catherine had been unconscious for 36 hours. The harbour ledger said she had ordered the storm bell rung, opened the refuge room, signed for 12 coils of rope, and paid 6 men who later swore she had stood beside them in sleet. At dawn, She placed both records beneath the same window in the narrow Truro parlour and let the contradiction speak before anyone did. Mrs. Price stood beside her with the old tide book. Catherine's solicitor had arranged 2 witnesses and no more. She would not bury truth beneath a procession. The harbour master arrived first, carrying a cap darkened by rain. Reverend Hale followed with a folded receipt inside his coat. Catherine asked the harbour master one question. "Were you at Merricliff on the 14th of January, 1855? "I was, Your Grace." "Did you see me? You gave the order to ring the bell when the brig drifted toward the western reef. Was I carried there? No. Was I confused? You corrected my tide count." A faint flush touched his face. "You were right." Catherine turned to the fever card. "This says, I was unconscious from the evening of the 13th until the morning of the 15th. The harbour master looked at the date and frowned. "Then the card is false." "Will you say that before the magistrate?" "I will." Reverend Hale produced his receipt. It recorded Catherine's authorization of blankets, lamp oil, and roof repairs for the refuge. His signature stood beside hers. "I argued with Her Grace about using harbour income for the expense," he admitted. "She answered me for nearly 20 minutes. I remember because I lost the argument." Catherine's solicitor compared the date. The same fever card placed Catherine in a stupor. "You will testify?" Catherine asked. "Yes, not because the Duke expects it." Reverend Hale's eyes met hers. "Because I do." That answer mattered. She had no wish to replace one man's authority with another's. The witnesses signed their statements and left. Mrs. Price opened a small packet delivered from London during the night. Inside lay a stationer's receipt for cream medical cards, crimson silk thread, and a walnut case lining. The purchaser was listed as Gresham and Company. The date was 10 days before the wedding. Catherine touched the pressed laurel pattern along the paper's edge. It matched the fever cards. The materials existed before the observations were supposedly completed, she said. Her solicitor nodded. "It does not prove who wrote them." "No, it proves preparation." Mrs. Price looked toward the door as footsteps sounded in the hall. A servant entered. "The Duke of St. Aldwyn is here, Your Grace." Catherine did not answer at once. Then Frederick's voice came from outside the parlour. "May I enter?" He had come without livery, political ally, or visible claim upon the room. Catherine looked at the open evidence case and then toward the door. "You may." Frederick entered and stopped several feet from the table. His coat was damp, and fatigue marked the skin beneath his eyes. He looked first at Catherine, then at the harbour ledger and fever card. "You found a witness chain." "The sea kept one." He read the statements in silence. When he reached the stationer's receipt, his expression changed. "Gresham and Company purchased the materials before the marriage." "Yes." Arabella knew the fever narrative might need to survive, beyond the wedding, or beyond my recovery. Frederick placed the receipt down carefully. "I resigned from Ashcomb's committee this morning." Catherine's gaze lifted. "Why?" "Because he made continued support conditional upon my maintaining silence until Bellamy's testimony became public. And the merchants. One has delayed further accommodation. The other has not yet answered. Merricliff wages? Covered. Repairs? Covered." Catherine studied him. "You chose the costly answer." "Late." "Yes, he accepted it, but I chose it." Frederick removed a folded letter from his coat and gave it to her solicitor, not to Catherine. The resignation named no private details. It stated that he would not preserve political standing by withholding public support from a wife he believed competent and truthful. Catherine read it once. "This is correction," she said, "not courtship. I know, do you? I brought no flowers." The dryness in his voice almost reached her. She refused the smile before it formed, a rare act of judgment. He looked at the evidence table. "There is more." A second man waited in the hall. He entered when Catherine's solicitor called him. Mr. Bellamy was thin, pale, and dressed with the care of someone who owned little but wished to look respectable. He kept his hat in both hands. "You served as Dr. Rook's clerk?" Catherine asked. "For 5 years, Your Grace." "Did you receive a packet from Ellen Ward 2 days before my wedding?" Bellamy swallowed. "I did. What was inside?" "Medical notes, 6 cards, some partly written, some blank except for dates." Frederick went still. Catherine kept her voice level. "Were the notes signed by nurses?" "No." "Who told you to add the initials E.M., Dr. Rook? Did a nurse with those initials exist? Not to my knowledge." "Did Dr. Rook examine me during the final 2 months before the marriage?" Bellamy looked toward Frederick, then back to Catherine. "No. How do you know?" "I kept his appointment book." "Who supplied the observations?" "Lady Arabella's household, sometimes by messenger, sometimes in her own hand." The room seemed to contract around the sentence. Catherine placed the crimson thread cards before him. "Did you stitch these?" "Yes." "When?" "The evening before the wedding." Mrs. Price drew a slow breath. Catherine's solicitor began writing. Bellamy's hands shook. "Dr. Rook said the cards needed to look complete. He said no one would compare dates once the marriage was settled." "Why did he agree?" Catherine asked. Bellamy looked down. "Lady Arabella's brother promised introductions to 3 great houses. Dr. Rooker said one ducal household would make his name." Frederick's face hardened, and when the dates did not match, I questioned him. He said the patient would not live to dispute them. Silence followed. Catherine felt the cruelty of the sentence, but not surprise. Surprise belonged to people who had not spent 3 years living beneath its consequence. "Why speak now?" she asked. "Because he dismissed me after I found the returned letters in his office. Because Lady Arabella's brother denied the introductions. Because I know they will blame me if the cards are examined." "Fear is not innocence," Catherine said. "No, Your Grace, but it may still tell the truth." Bellamy looked at her for the first time. "I will testify." "Publicly?" "Yes. Then you will be protected, not hidden." Catherine's solicitor prepared the statement. Frederick did not question Bellamy alone. He did not threaten him. He remained beside the wall and let Catherine control the room. When the statement was signed, Bellamy left under the solicitor's care. Frederick then placed a sealed deed on the table. "This confirms the authority created by the marriage settlement. No trustee may root Merricliff management through me during the dispute. The separate use provisions remain in force regardless of the inquiry." Catherine broke the seal and read. The language did not grant her a favor. It closed the path others might use to treat Frederick as substitute owner. "You signed this before knowing whether I would return to Mereworth House." "Yes." "Or forgive you." "Yes." "Why?" "Because saying I believe you while retaining the power to overrule you is another form of disbelief." Catherine looked at him. The answer held no plea. That made it harder to dismiss. "Sit," she said. Frederick obeyed. Together they arranged the chronology. Catherine read the dates. Frederick matched them to Bellamy's statement, the stationer's receipt, the harbour ledger, and Ellen's confession. Mrs. Price corrected one entry. No one touched Catherine without asking. No one closed the door. Near noon, a messenger arrived, carrying a sealed note from Arabella. Catherine opened it. The page announced that at Truro, Arabella would produce a signed letter in which Catherine described herself as unfit to remain among rational people. Frederick looked at her. "Did you write that?" Catherine searched her memory. First winter. Bitter cold. A lamp left burning after Mrs. Price had gone. A sentence written too quickly because anger had finally outrun weakness. I wrote part of it. Part. The full sentence was longer. Catherine folded the note. I wrote that I was unfit to remain among rational people who discussed my death as profit. Frederick understood. She cut the sentence, or the page. Catherine placed the notice beside the fever cards. Then she has finally brought the weapon she thinks will bury me. She looked at Bellamy's signed statement, the stationer's receipt, and the storm ledger. This time, she will have to raise it in a room where I am still standing. Arabella placed the torn letter before the magistrate as though she were laying down a weapon everyone had already agreed to fear. Truro Guildhall was crowded beyond comfort, its stone walls holding the cold and every whisper. Trustees, harbour representatives, solicitors, local gentlemen, and several London observers filled the benches. Catherine stood at the central table with her own solicitor to one side and Mrs. Price behind her. Frederick had arrived earlier, but had not taken the place beside her until she chose it. When she entered, he moved one chair back from the table and waited. Catherine sat. Only then did he sit beside her. The magistrate opened the inquiry by stating that it concerned disputed lease declarations, intercepted correspondence, and suspected false records connected to Merricliff. He did not call Catherine incapable. He did not call the gathering a trial of her mind. That difference mattered. Arabella's solicitor rose first. We submit a letter written and signed by Her Grace during the winter following her marriage. In it, she declares herself unfit to remain among rational people. A murmur moved through the room. Catherine watched Arabella's face, calm, pale, expectant. The torn page crossed the table. Catherine recognized the paper, the ink, and the slant of her own hand before she touched it. "Is the signature yours?" the magistrate asked. "It is." Arabella's eyes sharpened. "And the sentence?" "Part of it." Rook shifted in his chair. Catherine held the page toward the nearest window. The lower edge was not straight. Fibers lifted where the sheet had been torn along a fold. The final visible word ended at the crease, and a narrow stroke of ink continued below it before disappearing at the broken edge. Catherine placed two surviving letters from the same winter beside it. Their folds aligned exactly. The complete sentence read, "I am unfit to remain among rational people who discuss my death as profit." The rest was torn away. Arabella's solicitor gave a restrained smile, a convenient reconstruction. "Then examine what remains." Catherine pointed to the ink, crossing the fold. The sentence continued beyond the word people. The lower half was removed afterward. The magistrate leaned forward. Catherine's solicitor handed him a lens. He studied the fibers, then the matching folds. "There was additional text," he said. "The content remains disputed." "The content appears in another draft," Catherine replied. Mrs. Price produced a copied page from the Merricliff correspondence book made before the original letter left Cornwall. The clerk read the full sentence aloud. The room changed. Not loudly, more dangerously. Arabella's expression tightened for the first time. "A household copy may be altered," she said. Catherine looked at her. Then the original was cut because the complete line was less useful. Rook rose slightly. "Even complete, the language is agitated." Catherine turned toward him. "Can a woman be angry because people discuss her death as profit and remain sane?" Anger alone proves nothing, yet you have used it each time evidence became inconvenient. The magistrate lifted one hand. Doctor, Rook will answer when called. Catherine opened the leather case. The 6 crimson thread fever cards were arranged by date. Mrs. Price explained how they had been found in the walnut case, how the needle holes aligned, and how the thread passed through ink on some cards, but beneath ink on others. One trustee examined the stack against the light. These were assembled together, he said, not over the months written here. Rookie's solicitor objected. Medical notes may be recopied. Catherine answered. Then they should not have been presented as original bedside observations. She selected the first contradiction. This card states, I was delirious on the 12th of November, 1854. Her solicitor placed the marriage settlement ledger beside it. On that date, I negotiated and signed the amendment before 6 witnesses. The next card recorded that she had been unconscious from the evening of January 13th until the morning of the 15th. The harbour master stepped forward and swore that Catherine had ordered the storm bell rung on the 14th, corrected his tide count, and authorized rope for a vessel near the reef. Reverend Hale confirmed her signature on refuge repairs that same day. Catherine used no more examples. 2 were enough. The magistrate looked toward Rook. Did you personally observe her grace during either event? No. Did you examine her during the final 8 weeks before the marriage? Rook's answer came reluctantly, not directly. Then who supplied these observations? Attendants. Name the nurse signing E.M. Rook looked at the cards. The household records were incomplete. Catherine said nothing. Silence had become more useful than anger. The magistrate called Frederick. He stood without asking Catherine's permission because the question concerned his own conduct. Did you believe the Duchess was terminally ill when you married her? Yes. Upon what did you rely, Doctor? Rook's summary. Did you read the individual cards? Frederick looked toward the crimson thread. No. The word carried through the hall. Did you leave her grace at Merricliff, believing she might die within months? Yes. Arabella glanced toward him, perhaps expecting explanation. He gave none. The magistrate asked, Why did you leave? Frederick's face remained controlled, but his voice lost the shelter of rank. Because I was a coward. I called it duty. I told myself that a house, servants, money, and a physician's instructions amounted to care. I left because witnessing what I believed would happen would have forced me to face the kind of marriage I had made. No one moved. Catherine felt the truth strike the room and stay there. It did not ask her to comfort him. That mattered. Arabella's solicitor rose. Your Grace's regret does not establish the validity of her Grace's records. Frederick turned toward him. Her competence does not excuse my conduct. It condemns it. Catherine looked at him then. He had finally chosen the sentence that cost him most. Not that he had been deceived. Not that Rook had failed him. That he had failed her. Lord Ashcombe lowered his eyes. The trustees no longer looked at Catherine as though they were waiting for hysteria. They looked at Frederick, as though his confession had removed their safest excuse. Catherine's solicitor then presented the stationer's receipt, showing Gresham and Company had purchased cream cards, crimson thread, and walnut case lining 10 days before the wedding. Arabella's composure returned by force. A commercial house purchases many things. Medical cards? Catherine asked. Paper can be described in several ways. And the laurel edge? Common. And the timing? Coincidence. The magistrate did not answer. He examined the receipt, then ordered it marked with the other papers. Outside, carriage wheels sounded against the wet street. A clerk near the rear door looked over his shoulder. The doors opened. A thin man in a travel-stained coat entered, carrying a leather portfolio stamped with the crest of Gresham and Company. Arabella went white before he spoke. The man bowed toward the magistrate. "My name is Edwin Marsh. I served as agent for the proposed Western Harbour transfer." He placed the portfolio on the evidence table. "I was instructed to preserve the original papers if the lease was disputed." Arabella's solicitor stepped forward. "You were dismissed for misconduct." "I was dismissed for refusing to destroy these." Catherine heard the room draw one breath. Marsh opened the portfolio and removed a single sheet. Across its margin, in a hand Catherine had seen upon calling cards, private notes, and the returned courier instructions, were several lines written by Arabella. The magistrate took the page and read silently. His expression changed. Frederick did not look at Arabella. Catherine did. "Read it," she said. The magistrate lifted his eyes. "The full instruction will be entered tomorrow with sworn testimony. Then read the condition." He looked once more at the margin. "Transfer effective upon death or certified incapacity of the Duchess." No one spoke. Arabella stood rigid beside Dr. Ruki while Catherine looked at the sentence, prepared before her vows, and understood that the final door in the design had opened. They had not merely expected her death, they had prepared to profit if she survived without power. The next morning, Edwin Marsh read Arabella's instruction aloud before the entire Guildhall. "Transfer effective upon death or certified incapacity of the Duchess." The words were plain. Their cruelty came from how little emotion they contained. Arabella stood at the opposite table in dove-grey silk, one gloved hand resting against the chair before her. Dr. Rook sat beside his solicitor, his face drained of its usual authority. Catherine remained at the central table, with Mrs. Price behind her and Frederick one step to the side. He did not touch the evidence. He did not speak before she did. Marsh explained that Gresham and Company had been near collapse after 2 failed shipping ventures. The Western storage rights at Merricliff offered access to a protected harbour, warehouse income, and credit against expected trade. "Who instructed you to prepare the transfer?" the magistrate asked. "Lady Arabella Gresham." "Did she know the Duchess might survive?" "The instruction accounted for it." Arabella lifted her chin. "Because someone had to protect both houses from disorder." Catherine looked at her. "By taking control if I lived. By preserving wages, credit, and reputation when your illness made continuity uncertain. My illness did not make my property yours." Arabella's restraint fractured. "You were expected to die. Everyone said so. The physicians, your relatives, the trustees. Frederick's name was already damaged by your family's failures. The Gresham concern could have stabilized the harbour. Hundreds depended upon these houses remaining solvent. And I was one woman already dying." The room went silent. Catherine felt no shock, only clarity. "So you decided my life was a reasonable cost?" Arabella's eyes flashed. "I decided that refusing to prepare would have been irresponsible." "You prepared the cards." "I prepared information for Dr. Ruker. You staged the blood. I preserved the marriage. You intercepted my letters." Arabella did not answer. Catherine stepped closer to the table. "You did not save wages. I did. You did not repair the harbour. I did. You did not keep Merricliff alive. You needed it empty enough to inherit." Arabella looked toward Frederick. "Tell her what would have happened if Mereworth had fallen." Frederick's voice was quiet. "Do not use my fear to excuse your choice. I protected you. You protected the version of me that never had to know the truth. Arabella's expression changed. For 1 second, something raw appeared beneath the polish. I believed you would marry me once the obligation ended. Catherine heard the private future beneath the public scheme. A dead duchess, a restored duke, a Gresham alliance praised as rescue. And when I did not die, Catherine asked. Arabella's hand tightened on the chair. Then incapacity remained. The magistrate ordered the sentence entered in the record. Catherine's solicitor called Mr. Bellamy. The former clerk approached with visible fear, but gave his name clearly. He confirmed that Dr. Rouquet had not examined Catherine during the final 2 months before the marriage. He confirmed that Arabella's household supplied the notes, that the nurse initials E.M. were invented, and that he stitched the 6 cards together the night before the wedding. Rook rose. He is a dismissed clerk seeking revenge. Bellamy looked at him. You dismissed me after I found the returned letters. Because you mishandled private correspondence. Because I asked why the dates did not match. The magistrate turned to Rook. Did you sign the medical summary without verifying the observations? I relied upon household reports. Reports you knew were not signed by real attendants. I knew the patient had suffered pleurisy. I knew the decline was grave. Did you believe she might die regardless of the record's accuracy? Ruka's mouth hardened. I believed survival was unlikely. Catherine spoke before the magistrate could continue. And because I might die, truth no longer mattered. Rouquet looked at her with something close to resentment. Medicine is not certainty. Yet you sold certainty to everyone who benefited from it. He said nothing. Bellamy's voice shook. He told me no one would compare the dates because Her Grace would not live to dispute them. The sentence entered the hall and stripped Rouquet of the last shelter of professional caution. One trustee lowered his head. Another moved his chair away from the physician. Lord Ashcombe, standing near the wall, did not look toward Frederick. The magistrate instructed that the cards, receipt, returned letters, transfer papers, and witness statements be preserved. He stated that the evidence supported further proceedings concerning suspected fraud, interference with correspondence, and false declarations used in an attempted property transfer. The papers concerning Rook would be placed before the proper medical body. The disputed Gresham lease would receive no certification while the evidence stood. The words mattered, but Catherine knew the room still waited for something larger than procedure. She opened the leather case and removed the silver hourglass. A faint murmur moved across the benches. Frederick recognized it at once. Catherine placed it in the center of the table. This was given to me on my wedding day, she said. It measured 3 minutes. 3 minutes standing, 3 minutes walking, 3 minutes before someone decided effort had become dangerous. She turned it. White sand began to fall. I asked the room for the same amount of silence now. The magistrate nodded. No one spoke. Rain touched the high windows. The sand whispered through the narrow glass. Catherine looked at the evidence surrounding it. Crimson thread cards, the torn letter, Arabella's instruction, Bellamy's statement, the handkerchief bearing A.G., the returned envelopes. 3 winters had been reduced by others to symptoms, signatures, and useful delays. Now everyone who had spoken over her body was required to wait upon her time. Frederick stood motionless beside her. Shame had not bowed him. It had made him remain visible. Arabella looked toward the benches where former allies no longer met her eyes. Rook stared at the floor. The trustees watched the final grains descend. When the hourglass emptied, Catherine rested 2 fingers beside its silver frame. That was less time than many of you required to decide I should marry, disappear, surrender my property, or be declared incapable. Her voice carried without force. Not one of you asked what I knew of my own body. Not one asked what I wanted from my own life. You believed I had to be dead before I was entitled to contradict you. No one answered. I was ill, Catherine continued. I was weak. I was frightened. None of those things made me dishonest, irrational, or available for disposal. She looked at Arabella. You called my life a cost. Then at Ruque. You called falsehood a prognosis. Then at the trustees. You called delay caution. Finally, she looked at Frederick, and you called absence care. His face tightened, but he did not look away. Every name made the same act easier to bear for the person committing it. The eldest trustee rose. Your Grace, the records before us establish that your management of Merricliff was active, documented, and lawful under the settlement. We acknowledge that authority. It was not applause. It was better. It was record. Frederick stepped forward, only after Catherine turned toward him. Catherine Merworth is the lawful Duchess of St. Aldwyn, he said. Merricliff remains under her separate authority. I abandoned her because protecting my reputation mattered more to me than questioning a story that made my life easier. I will not ask this room to excuse me because I was deceived. I chose not to look closely enough. He removed a sealed deed and the Merricliff keys from his coat. The trust provisions have been confirmed. No trustee may root her authority through me. No disputed account may be used to reduce her rights under the settlement. He placed the keys beside the hourglass. I will not ask society to forgive me before she decides what can be forgiven. Catherine accepted the deed. Then she took the keys. She did not take the arm he offered. Frederick lowered it at once. Across the room, Arabella turned to Lord Ashcombe. He stepped away before she could speak. Ruca's solicitor whispered that several households had already sent messengers withdrawing his attendance. Arabella's own solicitor gathered the Gresham papers without looking at her. Social consequence arrived before any formal judgment. Arabella faced Catherine. You have ruined me. Catherine closed the leather case. No, I refuse to remain useful to your lie. The magistrate ordered the inquiry adjourned pending further proceedings. Catherine left the Guildhall with Mrs. Price. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the road west shone beneath a clearing sky. Frederick followed only as far as the steps. Will you return to Merricliff? He asked. Yes. May I come? Catherine looked toward the carriage waiting below. Not with me. Pain crossed his face, but he bowed. I understand. Catherine entered the carriage alone. The keys rested in her lap, the hourglass beside them, and the trust deed beneath her hand. As Truro receded behind her, Frederick remained on the Guildhall steps. This time, the distance between them had not been made by abandonment. It had been chosen by the woman who survived. By spring, the western cliff above Merricliff no longer resembled a place where a woman had been sent to disappear. Stonecutters worked beside the old refuge wall. Carpenters raised a new roof beam above a long room planned for stranded travelers, sailors carried in from the reef, and women sent away by families who found illness more convenient when hidden. Catherine stood among the plans with the Merricliff keys at her waist and a list of wages in one hand. Every payment bore her signature. Every rule for the refuge had been written to prevent kindness from becoming control. No patient would be confined without cause. No letter would be withheld. No physician would speak over a person who remained able to answer. Mrs. Price crossed the unfinished courtyard, carrying 3 envelopes. "The London post has arrived, Your Grace." Catherine accepted the first. Her solicitor reported that the complaint against Dr. Tobias Rook had been placed before the Royal College of Physicians. Several aristocratic households had already removed his name from their lists, and 2 families had refused to receive him after learning how the fever cards were prepared. The second letter confirmed that the Gresham claim to the Western lease had collapsed. Repayment of improper fees was being arranged through solicitors. Attached to it was a calling card belonging to Arabella. The card had been returned unopened by Lady Westbury, the same woman whose card had been withdrawn from Catherine upon her arrival in London. Catherine looked at the folded corner, then placed it back inside the envelope. "Justice has a poor memory when society is choosing its next guest," she said. Mrs. Price did not disagree. The third letter came from Catherine's aunt. Its language moved carefully around apology and landed upon money. The family had suffered from misunderstanding. Creditors remained difficult. Surely some portion of the recovered Merricliffe funds might properly be considered a Locksley interest. Catherine read the request once, then she handed it to her solicitor's clerk, who waited near the foundation plans. Reply: that the marriage settlement grants them no benefit from Merricliffe. No future request regarding the estate will be entertained. The clerk bowed. "Shall I include any personal message?" Catherine looked toward the sea. "No, they spent enough years speaking as though my silence belonged to them." When the letters had been carried away, Mrs. Price offered the 4th item from the post. Frederick had written every week since Truro. His letters contained no flowers pressed between pages, no declarations demanding an answer, and no account of his suffering. He reported the correction of Mareworth records, the dismissal of a clerk who had concealed correspondence, and the restoration of wages to 2 junior employees blamed for missing dispatches. He had also sold a parcel of land unconnected to tenant holdings to cover the delay in merchant credit. At the bottom of the latest page, he had written one sentence apart from the rest: "I remain prepared to wait until waiting no longer serves you." Catherine folded the letter. "Well," Mrs. Price asked, "he has learned patience." "That was not my question. Then you should ask a better one." Before Mrs. Price could answer, the storm bell sounded once, not the urgent pattern used for a vessel near the reef. One measured stroke crossed the cliffs and faded into the afternoon wind. Catherine turned toward the iron gate. A carriage stood beyond it, without outriders or ducal standard. Frederick waited on the road beside the closed bars, his hat in one hand. He did not touch the latch. The workers had fallen quiet, though most pretended otherwise. Mrs. Price looked at Catherine. "A better question, then. Will you open the gate?" Catherine handed her the wage list. "Yes." She crossed the terrace alone. Frederick watched her approach, but he did not speak until she stopped on the inner side of the iron bars. "You came without notice," she said. "I did not want notice to become permission assumed. And if I had left you outside, I would have returned to Truro. How long would you have waited?" A faint change touched his expression, until the weather made waiting foolish. "Not forever. Forever is usually another word people use when they want devotion to sound more impressive than judgment." Catherine almost smiled. "You have improved. Painfully." She placed the key in the lock and opened the gate inward. Frederick did not step through until she moved aside. He entered without retinue, title, or visible claim. His gaze moved toward the refuge walls. You began before the final repayment. The harbour advanced the cost. Of course it did. There was admiration in his voice, but no surprise. Catherine noticed the difference. He no longer treated competence as something she had acquired after suffering. He regarded it as something others had failed to see. They walked toward the refuge. Frederick matched her pace. He did not offer his arm. Rook's hearing may take months, he said, but the households withdrawing patronage have already ended most of his practice. And Arabella? Her brother sold the London house. She is living with an aunt in Bath. Is she ruined? Socially, perhaps. Financially, certainly diminished. Catherine looked ahead. She believed she was protecting a future. She believed your life was a reasonable price for it. His anger remained controlled but alive. Catherine stopped beside the unfinished foundation. Do not spend the rest of your life hating her for what you permitted yourself not to question. Frederick absorbed the words without defense. I will not. What will you do instead? Remember my part clearly. The answer was quiet. It did not ask for praise. One of the masons called that the cornerstone was ready. Catherine looked toward the small cliff chapel beyond the refuge wall. Its windows had been cleaned, its warped door rehung, and the salt-stained stones repaired. Walk with me, she said. Frederick followed her inside. The chapel held no witnesses. Sunlight crossed the floor where sailors had once knelt after surviving the reef. Catherine stood before the simple altar. Frederick remained several feet away. I did not bring you here to restore what we had, she said. What we had should not be restored. Then why did you open the gate? Because I need to know whether something else can be built. Frederick waited. He had learned that silence could be an answer shaped by restraint rather than evasion. Catherine continued. Wycliffe remains under my separate authority. Yes, I go to London only when I choose. Yes, no physician, steward, trustee, relative, or husband makes decisions concerning my body, residence, or household without me present. Yes, if we disagree, you do not use your title to turn disagreement into obedience. Agreed. You answer quickly, because none of those terms diminishes me. The truth of that settled between them. Catherine looked toward the open chapel door. Beyond it, the sea moved beneath a clear sky. Forgiveness is not finished. I know. There may be days when I remember your carriage leaving more clearly than I remember you standing here. Then I will not ask you to pretend otherwise. Trust may return slowly. I will not hurry it. Frederick took one step closer and stopped. May I say one thing? You may. I love you because you see clearly even when clarity costs you comfort. I do not wish to build another life upon your absence. The confession was shorter than the one he had given at the dinner, less polished, more true. Catherine held his gaze. That is better than saying, you cannot live without me. I can live without you. Pain passed across his face without disguise. I simply do not wish to choose that life. She crossed the remaining distance and held out her hand. We are already married, yes, so there will be no proposal. No public renewal for London to admire. Never. Catherine placed her hand in his. Then let this be the beginning we were denied. Frederick closed his fingers carefully around hers. In the empty chapel, they repeated no formal vows. Catherine promised honesty. Frederick promised presence, restraint, and truth before reputation. When they stepped outside, they did so side by side. The workers had gathered near the foundation stone. Mrs. Price held the silver hourglass on a folded cloth. Catherine took it and turned it once. White sand began to fall. Frederick stood beside her without speaking. When the final grain settled, Catherine opened the silver frame. The mason mixed the sand into the mortar beneath the cornerstone. "Do you regret losing it?" Frederick asked. Catherine watched the last pale grains disappear into the foundation. "No. It finally holds something worth keeping." The stone was lowered into place. Above them, the storm bell rang across the cliffs, not as warning, but to mark the opening of a refuge where no one would be left unseen. Catherine reached for Frederick's hand before he could ask. He held it, and this time she did not pull away.